Welcome to the Syria Spectrum Analysis. I'm your host, Zakaria Al Shmaly. Today, we're diving into the future of development. So let's set up the scene. What are the Sustainable Development Goals, and why should you care? Back in 2015, the UN General Assembly adopted the Sustainable Development Goals and promised to leave no one behind. The 17 colorful icons were meant to guide humanity towards prosperity, equality, and peace. 10 years later, that optimism feels like a combination of delusion and hubris. In 2025, the United States stood alone, with 7 semi-states voting against the International Day of Peaceful Coexistence at the United Nations General Assembly. In its official letter, the US did not just reject that one resolution, it rejected the entire idea of sustainable development goals. That moment was more than diplomatic embarrassment or even an uncoordinated transatlantic hiccup. It marked the end of a shared belief that development can be universal, technical, and apolitical. The strategic ambiguity that development economists thrived in since the 1990s is now over. And for countries trapped between war and recovery, like Syria, Ukraine, Sudan, and Palestine, that collapse of belief changes everything. I decided to make this video after reading Adam Tooze's article on foreign policy. He argues that the idea of economic development was always a political project disguised as global goodwill, going one step further in the debate that started by the 2013 classic Development Aid Confronts Politics. All the way from the Marshall Plan to the Millennial Development Goals, not to be mistaken with the Sustainable Development Goals, aid was never just about generosity. It has always been about strategy. Initially, development was portrayed as an apolitical tool back in the 1960s up to the 1980s, and they were used to win over non-aligned countries during the Cold War. Yet, in the 1990s, the door to politics was widely opened up with the fall of the Soviet Union. However, when China rose as an economic superpower, it wasn't celebrated as a triumph of human progress. It was labeled a threat. When Russia recovered, its growth became a weapon against its neighbors. Hence, development, as Tooze reminds us, is about the history of nation converting prosperity into power. Or in other words, development has always meant the weaponization of economics for political means, stated or implicit. The Sustainable Development Goals tries to escape this history. They replace politics with infographics, with 17 boxes and aspirations that requires $5 to $7 trillion of funding a year. This is not a small investment. Yet, financing of the SDGs relies mostly on private, public, or blended finances that never truly materialized, nor was it focused on developed countries. This reverse happened, and trillions of expectations shrank into billions of unmet promises. In fact, the states that supported the SDGs now publicly claim that the goal of their development policy is transactional, with a focus on security and migration. Hence, the universalist dreams of the SDGs died quietly, replaced with a fragmented world where each power finds its own idea of progress and spheres of economic influence. And yet, in the Middle East, that illusion lasted longer than we think. Few places reveal this transformation in development policy better than in Syria. After 14 years of conflict, cities lie in ruin. Half of the population has been displaced, and more than 90% of lives live under the poverty line. But international development, the engine that once rebuilt Europe and Asia, is nowhere to be found when it's most needed. Since the start of the Syrian revolution, Western governments have provided billions in humanitarian aid, but almost none in reconstruction. The logic is simple and makes sense. No political transition, no rebuilding. However, the divisions between saving lives and development, or the humanitarian development nexus, is deadly, especially when politics are in deadlock. Aid without reconstruction freezes societies in a permanent crisis, or, as Adam Tooze calls it, a polycrisis, where dealing with one crisis simply leads to another. It's a vicious cycle. Big development became a business of economists, but it was not and will not be the only game in town. For example, inside Syria, small projects continue. Water sanitations repaired by local NGOs, roads reopened by municipalities, solar grids funded by diaspora capital. But these are islands in a sea of institutional collapse. However, when the West retreated, others advanced. China, Turkey, and the Gulf states are redefining what development means. It's less about governance, more about strategy. For Beijing, it's about connectivity, ports, industrial zones, digital infrastructure, and indeed a new market for its solar panels. For the Gulf states, it's strategic leverage, contracts, energy corridors, reconstruction diplomacy, and filling the space left by Western donors. For Turkey, it's survival economics wrapped in geopolitical influence. And for ordinary Syrians, it's the daily calculus of trying to get water, electricity, and wages. This isn't simply an aid story. It's a contest over who gets to shape the post-war economy and whether Syria's sovereignty can be ever rebuilt through fragmented partnerships. Look beyond Syria, and the pattern repeats. In Gaza, development is hostage to the geopolitics of peace. In Ukraine, aid is generous, but it's securitized, military before civilian, and Europe is divided and reliant on the US. Across Africa, blended finance projects promise billions, but deliver cents on the dollar. The shift is towards the end of a politically neutral development agenda. Aid has returned to its original form as an instrument of alignment, or another tool of foreign policy, if you say so. The Belt and Road Initiative, which began in 2013, 2 years before the SDGs, now rivals the World Bank in scale. China's Global Development Initiative narrows the SDGs to 8 priorities: poverty reduction, food security, digital economy, focusing mostly on results rather than reform. Meanwhile, Western donors reduce budgets to fund walls or wars, despite a very tight fiscal space. France, Germany, the UK all proclaim support for the Sustainable Development Goals while cutting assistance development to the Sahel, where coups and insurgencies multiply. So if development has become a battlefield for competing paradigms, where does this leave reconstruction for a place like Syria? Without a shared framework, aid becomes transactional. Projects become political signals rather than long-term strategies, and promises of rebuilding better turn into a patchwork of spheres of influence. When I first left Syria, I worked as a humanitarian aid worker like many Syrians in southeastern Turkey. Every day, my colleagues and I asked ourselves the same unspoken question: what comes after aid, after what we're doing? Years after studying and working around Europe, I still hear echoes of the same question. Only now, it's asked in think tanks, policy papers, and conference halls. The uncomfortable truth is that no one can build a country with a paradigm that's already dead. Not in Syria, not in Ukraine, and most definitely not in Palestine. If development was once a promise of shared progress, today it's a reflection of global hierarchy. So, what has replaced the old idea of development if Adam Tooze declares the death of development? The future of reconstruction, whether in Syria, Gaza, Sudan, or Ukraine, depends on the new global political economy, one that values competence, accountability, and domestic capacity as much as external funding. The new rules are not yet written, even though they will shape more than just aid and reconstruction. They will also shape the global economy and the relationship between and within states. To quote Adam Tooze one more time, aid is more than ticking boxes. It's about the will to power. For Syrians, that must mean the courage to reclaim agency, to define what rebuilding actually serves and what it actually means. Reconstruction is not only about restoring buildings. It's about restoring sovereignty, trust, and the belief that collective action can shape history once again. To close, development is not charity, but a strategic investment. And we need more strategic investment today than ever. You've been watching the Syria Spectrum Analysis, Syria and the World. If this episode challenges your view of development, share it with someone you know, someone who works on policy, or someone who works in aid. Let's work together to imagine rebuilding Syria, rebuilding all of these countries, and reimagining development itself, because it requires more than budgets and blueprints. It will require a new idea of progress in a multipolar world. I would like to thank the Syria Spectrum team, especially Roni Hamade, for helping make this video essay become a reality.